Captain Jake Morrison walked through the shining halls of New Geneva Station, his boots making soft sounds on the polished metal floor. The station floated in space between Earth and the alien worlds, a place where humans met with the Galaxy Council for the first time in their history. For 3 years, Jake had watched his people work hard to prove they belonged among the stars with the other races who had traveled between worlds for thousands of years. The Zalani were tall and thin with blue skin that seemed to glow in the dark. They spoke in musical voices and had been the first to welcome humans into their group. The Korath looked like giant machines made of silver metal, with red lights for eyes and voices that sounded like grinding gears. They respected human tools and weapons, but never seemed to truly like people. The Vorthak were warriors with thick gray skin and sharp teeth who fought in massive battles across the galaxy. Even they had learned to respect human soldiers after watching them fight. Jake thought humanity had finally found its place among the stars. Earth sent its best people to work with the Council. Scientists shared knowledge about new worlds. Soldiers trained together for peace missions. Traders brought goods from human worlds to alien markets. Everything seemed perfect, like a dream that had finally come true. Lieutenant Amy Phillips found Jake in his office as he read reports from Earth. She looked worried and held a small device in her shaking hands. Amy was young but smart, one of the best communication officers in the human fleet. She had been working late again, listening to alien radio signals and trying to learn their languages better. "Captain, you need to see this right now," Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. She set the device on his desk and pressed a button. Strange sounds filled the room, like music mixed with the grinding noise of machines. It was Zalani language, but mixed with Korath code signals. Jake listened as Amy translated the words. His face grew pale as he understood what the aliens were really saying about humans. The message was clear and terrible. Humanity was never meant to be equal partners. In the Galaxy Council, they were seen as young animals who could be used as workers or soldiers, nothing more. The Council had voted in secret meetings that humans had never been invited to join. The Zalani, who had seemed so friendly, called humans useful pets who could be trained to do simple jobs. The Korath spoke about human worlds as mining sites, where they could take metals and other valuable things. The Vorthak wanted human soldiers as shock troops to die in their wars while alien warriors stayed safe. None of them saw humans as real people with rights and freedom. But the worst part was still coming. Amy translated more of the message, and Jake felt sick to his stomach. The Council had decided that humans were growing too fast and becoming too smart. They might become a threat to alien power someday. So the Council voted to fix the human problem before it got worse. The plan was simple and brutal. Council fleets would attack Earth and all human colonies at the same time. Some humans would be kept alive as workers, but most would be killed. Human ships would be destroyed. Human technology would be taken away. The race that had reached for the stars would be crushed back down to nothing. Jake read the timeline that Amy had decoded. They had 72 hours before the first Council fleets reached Earth. Admiral Lisa Carter, the highest-ranking human in the galaxy, was already getting the same message at her base on the other side of the station. Soon, every human ship and base would know the truth about their alien friends. Jake stood up and walked to his window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien ships were already moving toward Earth. The blue world that had given birth to humanity would soon be under attack by the same creatures, who had smiled and shook hands with human ambassadors just days before. Amy waited for orders, but Jake already knew what had to be done. There would be no time to fight back, no way to defend Earth against fleets that had conquered hundreds of worlds. There was only one choice left for humanity if they wanted to survive as a free people. Jake picked up his communication device and sent the same message to every human ship, base, and colony in the galaxy. The message was short but clear. Pack. what you can carry, leave everything else behind, and run for your lives. The Galaxy Council had betrayed humanity, and now the only command that mattered was the one that might keep them alive. Run. Commander Ryan Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching screens that showed hundreds of human ships running for their lives. The Liberty was one of the biggest ships in the human fleet, built to carry supplies between Earth and the colonies. Now it was packed with families who had grabbed whatever they could before fleeing their homes. Ships of every kind joined the escape. Big military vessels flew next to small trading ships. Science stations that studied distant stars shut down their equipment and loaded their people onto transport ships. Mining vessels left their operations half-finished. Even tiny personal ships with just 1 or 2 people joined the growing fleet of refugees. Ryan had never seen anything like it. 3,000 ships moving together through space, all heading away from the worlds they called home. Children cried in the passenger areas while their parents tried to explain why they had to leave everything behind. Old people sat quietly, remembering the Earth they might never see again. Dr. Susan Blake worked without sleep in the computer rooms, copying every piece of human knowledge she could find. Science data, art files, music, books, movies, and the records of human history all had to be saved. If humanity was going to survive among the stars, they needed to keep the things that made them human. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded a group of military ships that flew around the outside of the civilian fleet. His job was to watch for council ships and buy time if the aliens caught up with them. Tony knew his small force could not win a real fight against alien war fleets, but they might be able to slow down an attack long enough for the civilians to escape. The first reports came in from the outer colonies. Council ships had arrived at New Dakota, a farming world where 2 million humans grew food for other colonies. Captain Lisa Warren commanded the destroyer UES Defiance and 3 other small ships that were supposed to protect the planet. She knew she could not win, but she had a job to do. Lisa kept her ships between the alien fleet and the transport ships carrying civilians away from New Dakota. For 6 hours, the small human force fought against Korath battleships that were 3 times bigger and much better armed. The Defiance shook under enemy fire while Lisa gave orders to her crew. They hit the aliens when they could and ran when they had to, always trying to give the transports more time to escape. One by one, the human ships were destroyed. Lisa watched her friends die as their ships exploded in bright flashes of light. But the transports kept moving away from the planet, carrying families to safety. When the Defiance finally took too much damage to keep fighting, Lisa sent her last message to the fleet. "They are away. We did our job." The same scene played out on dozens of human worlds. Small groups of defenders fought hopeless battles to buy time for civilians to escape. Most of the defenders died, but they saved millions of lives by holding the aliens back for just a few more hours. Earth itself became the biggest rescue operation in human history. General Paul Martinez organized the loading of anything valuable onto the largest ships. Art from every human culture went into special storage containers. Seeds and genetic samples from Earth animals were packed in freezing units. The plans for human technology were copied onto thousands of storage devices. President Karen Sullivan made the hardest choice any human leader had ever faced. She could try to defend Earth and watch billions of people die in a hopeless fight, or she could order everyone to abandon their home world and hope they could survive somewhere else. Karen chose survival over pride, life over death. The last ship to leave Earth was the massive colony vessel UES New Hope. Captain Steve Adams had spent 3 days loading 2 million people onto his ship, along with everything needed to start. Human colonies on new worlds. Families said goodbye to grandparents who were too old to travel. People took one last look at the blue sky and green fields they had known all their lives. Steve stood on his bridge as Earth grew smaller behind them. He could see Zilani ships moving toward the planet like silver dots against the black space. The aliens would land on the world that gave birth to humanity and take whatever they wanted. But they would not find any humans there to enslave or kill. The human fleet moved away from their home system in a long line of ships that stretched across space. Behind them, Council forces took control of empty worlds and wondered where all. The humans had gone. The aliens had expected to find cowering refugees begging for mercy. Instead, they found ghost towns and abandoned cities, proof that humanity had chosen freedom over surrender. Ryan Hayes looked at the star charts and realized they were heading into unknown space beyond the edge of Council territory. No human had ever been to the places they were going. There were no maps, no friendly ports, no safe harbors waiting for them. But there was something more important than safety out there in the dark. There was hope for a future where humans could be free. The human fleet drifted through empty space between the galaxy arms, far from any world that had ever known life. Navigation Officer Linda Torres stared at star maps that showed nothing but black void ahead of them. They had been running for 4 months now, and their supplies were getting dangerously low. Linda plotted courses through dead systems that even the oldest alien races had never explored. These were the forgotten places where stars had burned out long ago, leaving behind cold worlds and asteroid fields that might hide a refugee fleet. She used ancient star charts that were older than any council records, maps made by races that had died out millions of years before the Zalani or Korath ever left their home worlds. Commander Ben Parker organized teams that searched through the wreckage of dead worlds looking for anything useful. His people stripped metal from abandoned space stations and collected ice from frozen asteroids to make water. Every piece of equipment was checked and rechecked to make sure it would last as long as possible. Ben knew that one broken life support system or failed engine could mean death for thousands of people. Dr. Helen Davis worked in the growing areas of the larger ships, trying to create farms that could feed the fleet. She turned empty cargo holds into gardens where vegetables grew under artificial light. Every seed was precious, every plant was carefully tended. Helen calculated and recalculated how much food they would need and how long their supplies would last. Engineer Mark Thompson crawled through the machinery of dozens of ships, fixing things that were never meant to work for so long without proper maintenance. He modified engines to use less fuel and changed life support systems to work more efficiently. Mark and his teams worked 18 hours a day to keep the fleet moving and breathing. The children born during the flight had never seen a real world with sky and ground and growing things. They played in the corridors of ships and learned about Earth from pictures and stories. Some of the older people began to worry that humanity would become a race of space nomads, never again knowing the feeling of wind or rain. The first major discovery came when the deep space sensors picked up strange signals from the Kepler void, a region where no stars had formed and space was darker than anywhere else. Lieutenant Colonel Alex Johnson took a small scouting team to investigate what looked like artificial structures floating in the empty space. What Alex found changed everything. Hidden in the void was a massive facility that had been built by some unknown race millions of years ago. The structure was bigger than any human city, with towers and docking bays and power systems that still worked after all this time. Whoever built it had technology that made even council ships look like toys. Alex brought back pictures and sensor readings that amazed everyone who saw them. The facility was clearly a shipyard where somebody had built vessels that could travel between stars. But the builders were long gone, leaving behind only their incredible machines and empty workshops. Admiral Carter made the decision to move the fleet to the ancient facility and try to learn from it. They established a hidden base in the shadow of the alien structure, while teams of scientists and engineers worked to understand the technology they had found. Dr. Patricia Green led the team that tried to decode the computer systems left behind by the builders. She was a language expert who had learned to speak with dozens of alien races. But this was different. The writing was unlike anything humans had ever seen, made up of symbols that seemed to change meaning depending on how you looked at them. Patricia worked day and night with her team, feeding the alien symbols into computer programs and looking for patterns. Slowly, they began to understand that the symbols were not just writing, but also mathematical formulas and star maps all combined together. It was like finding a library, a science textbook, and a navigation chart, all written in the same code. The breakthrough came when Patricia realized that the symbols were arranged to tell a story. The builders called themselves the Forerunners, and they had been exploring the galaxy when it was young. Their records showed star maps of thousands of worlds and detailed information about dozens of alien races, including some that looked very familiar. The Forerunners had been like humans in many ways. They were curious and eager to explore, quick to learn new things and slow to give up when faced with problems. They had reached out to other races in friendship and tried to build a community among the stars where everyone could work together. But something had gone wrong. The Forerunner records told of betrayal and war, of trusted allies who turned against them and hunted them across the galaxy. Other races had seen the Forerunners as a threat and decided to destroy them before they became too powerful. Patricia read the final entries with growing excitement and fear. The Forerunners had not just died quietly when their enemies came for them. They had prepared something, a weapon or a tool that they left behind for others who might face the same fate. The records called it the key to breaking the cycle of betrayal that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. As Patricia translated more of the Forerunner files, she began to understand that the facility where they had taken shelter was more than just a shipyard. It was a library and a laboratory and a weapons factory all in one. The Forerunners had left behind the tools that future races would need to free themselves from the same pattern of oppression that had destroyed so many others. The human fleet had found more than just a place to hide. They had discovered the inheritance of a dead race that had faced the same enemies and the same choices that humanity now faced. Dr. Patricia Green stared at the Forerunner records displayed on her screen, trying to understand the terrible truth they revealed. The symbols glowed with soft light as her translation programs slowly turned alien writing into human words. What she was reading would change how humanity saw the galaxy forever. The Galaxy Council was not the first group to rule the stars. The Forerunner files showed a history that went back millions of years, with one civilization after another rising to power and then falling into ruin. Each time, it was the same pattern. Young races would reach the stars and try to join the older civilizations, only to be betrayed and destroyed when they became too successful. The Zelani, Korath, and Vorthak had not always been the rulers of the galaxy. Long ago, they had been young races themselves, struggling to survive against an earlier version of the Council. They had fought and schemed and finally won their freedom by destroying their oppressors. But instead of breaking the cycle, they had simply taken the place of their former masters. Commander Dan Foster led teams of archaeologists through the deeper parts of the Forerunner facility, looking for more evidence of the ancient race. What they found in the sealed chambers was both amazing and horrifying. The Forerunners had been much like humans, creative, curious, and eager to explore. Their art showed beautiful cities and happy families, people who had built a civilization based on learning and growth. But the later artwork told a different story. Dan found murals that showed alien ships attacking Forerunner worlds. He saw sculptures of families fleeing their homes, carrying children and a few precious belongings. The final pieces showed the Forerunners fighting desperately against enemies, who had once called them friends. The most important discovery was a chamber filled with star maps and weapon designs. The Forerunners had not just accepted their fate when the older races turned against them. They had planned and prepared, building something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Dr. Rachel Martinez worked with teams of engineers to understand the Forerunner weapon plans. What they found was not a traditional weapon that would destroy ships or planets. Instead, it was something much more clever and dangerous. The Forerunners had built a network of devices hidden throughout the galaxy that could disable the advanced technology that kept the Council races in power. The network was called the World Breaker Project, though it was not meant to break worlds, but to break the chains that held younger races in slavery. The devices were hidden on dead worlds and in deep space, waiting for someone with the right knowledge to activate them. When turned on, they would send out signals that could shut down Council technology and level the playing field between old and young civilizations. Captain Scott Williams organized defensive patrols around the hidden base, while the scientists worked to understand Forerunner technology. He knew that Council ships were still searching for the human fleet, and their hiding place would not stay secret forever. But Scott also knew that they had found something that could change the fate of every oppressed race in the galaxy. Admiral. Carter studied the World Breaker files and began to see possibilities that went far beyond just human survival. The Galaxy Council ruled through fear and superior technology, but what if that technology could be taken away? What if all the enslaved races could fight on equal terms with their oppressors? Carter began reaching out to other races that had suffered under Council rule. The Therian crystal miners had been enslaved by the Korath for hundreds of years, forced to work in dangerous conditions while their masters grew rich. The nomadic wanderer fleets had been pushed to the edge of the galaxy by Council expansion, forbidden from settling on any decent worlds. The Keeper Enclaves guarded ancient knowledge that the Council wanted to suppress or destroy. Each of these groups had reasons to hate the Council, but none had been strong enough to fight back alone. Admiral Carter realized that the Forerunner legacy could unite them all. If the Worldbreaker network could be activated, every oppressed race would have a chance to win their freedom. The first secret meetings took place on abandoned worlds far from Council space. Carter met with Therian work gang leaders who had managed to escape their Korath masters. She spoke with wanderer ship captains who had lost their homes to Council expansion. She negotiated with Keeper scholars who had preserved forbidden knowledge for thousands of years. The response was better than Carter had hoped. Every group was eager to join a rebellion that might actually succeed. The Therians had intimate knowledge of Korath technology and knew where their enemy bases were located. The Wanderers could move freely through space and carry messages between resistance groups. The Keepers understood ancient devices and could help activate the Forerunner network, but the aliens wanted proof that humans could deliver on their promises. They had been disappointed too many times by failed rebellions and broken alliances. Carter knew she had to show them something concrete before they would fully commit to the cause. The demonstration came when Dr. Patricia Green successfully activated a small Forerunner device that had been dormant for millions of years. The device sent out signals that temporarily shut down all Council technology within a light-year radius. For 12 hours, Zilani ships lost their shields, Korath weapons stopped working, and Vorthak communication systems went silent. Word of. The successful test spread quickly through the underground networks that connected oppressed races across the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, there was hope that the cycle of oppression could be broken. The Forerunners had left behind. The key to freedom and humanity had found the courage to use it. Admiral Carter stood in the main meeting room of the hidden base, looking at representatives from dozens of alien races who had come to join the growing resistance. The room buzzed with different languages and translation devices as species that had never worked together before tried to plan a galaxy-wide rebellion. Captain Andrew Bell had spent months traveling between hidden worlds, carrying supplies and messages to resistance groups. His ship, the UES Runner, was modified to look like an old trading vessel, allowing him to move freely through Council space without attracting attention. Andrew had become expert at finding the secret camps where escaped slaves and political refugees gathered to dream of freedom. The Therian crystal miners were among the first to join in large numbers. These small, gray-skinned people had worked in dangerous mines for the Korath for centuries, digging up the rare crystals that powered alien technology. Many had died from accidents or poisoning, but those who survived knew every detail of Korath, equipment, and bases. Commander Victoria Shaw established communication networks that connected resistance cells across thousands of light years. She used Forerunner technology to create message systems that the Council could not detect or decode. Victoria coordinated with Wanderer ship captains who carried coded messages between star systems, building a web of communication that spanned the galaxy. The Wanderers were perfect for this job because they had been traveling between stars for longer than any other race. Their ships were fast and hard to track, and they knew secret routes through space that even the Council had never mapped. The Wanderer captain Zek Nor became one of Carter's most trusted allies, using his fleet to move people and supplies where they were needed most. Training camps appeared on hidden worlds throughout the frontier regions. Human military officers worked with alien warriors to develop new fighting techniques that combined the best of every species. Colonel Jason Miller established the first integrated command structure where humans and aliens served together as equals, something that had never happened before in galactic history. The psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy's oppressed peoples had hope. Slaves began to resist their masters more boldly. Pirates and rebels who had worked alone started coordinating their attacks. Even on Council homeworlds, there were reports of unrest and sabotage. The Keepers proved to be invaluable allies because of their knowledge of ancient technology and history. These tall, thin beings had spent millennia preserving the records and artifacts of dead civilizations. They understood how Forerunner devices worked and could help repair and modify the ancient equipment. Dr. Helen Davis worked with Keeper scholars to establish food production systems that could feed the growing resistance army. They used techniques learned from a dozen different agricultural civilizations to grow crops on worlds that had never supported life before. Hidden farms sprouted on asteroid bases and underground installations. The Council's response was swift and brutal. They increased security on all their worlds and began searching more aggressively for the human refugees. Council fleets patrolled the frontier regions, boarding and searching any ship that looked suspicious. The penalty for helping the resistance was death, and many innocent people suffered for crimes they had not committed. But the harsh response only drove more species into the resistance. The Council had ruled through fear for so long that they did not know how to respond to open defiance. Every brutal crackdown created more enemies and pushed neutral races toward joining the rebellion. Engineer Mark Thompson worked with teams of alien technicians to reverse engineer Council technology and find its weaknesses. They discovered that most alien equipment relied on a few key systems that could be disrupted by Forerunner devices. If they could activate enough of the ancient network, they could leave Council forces helpless and confused. The resistance grew beyond anyone's expectations. Species that had been enemies for centuries put aside their differences to fight against their common oppressor. Human flexibility and innovation proved to be exactly what the galaxy needed to break free from the rigid patterns that had kept the Council in power. Dr. Patricia Green finally achieved complete understanding of the Worldbreaker network after months of studying Forerunner records. The ancient devices were scattered across 17 sectors of the galaxy, hidden on dead worlds and in deep space installations. Activating them all would require simultaneous strikes by coordinated teams, and they would only get one chance before the Council could respond. Captain Terry Thompson volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission, the assault on the primary Worldbreaker facility in the heart of Council territory. This massive installation controlled the entire network, but it was also the most heavily defended target in the galaxy. Terry knew that his chances of survival were small, but the mission was too important to worry about personal safety. Admiral Carter realized that they had reached the point of no return. The resistance was as strong as it would ever be, and the Council was beginning to understand the real threat they faced. Soon, alien forces would find the hidden base and destroy everything the Resistance had built. They had to act now, while they still had the element of surprise. The final preparations began as Resistance fighters across the galaxy received their orders. Human ships emerged from hiding while alien allies moved into position around Council worlds. The moment had come to find out if the Forerunner legacy could truly break the cycle of oppression that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Colonel Nancy Davis coordinated the timing from the main communications center, her screens showing the positions of Resistance forces across dozens of star systems. In just a few hours, the galaxy would either be free or the Resistance would be crushed forever. There would be no second chances and no retreat from the choice they were about to make. The galaxy erupted into chaos as 17 different Resistance cells launched their attacks at exactly the same moment. Captain Terry Thompson led his assault team toward the primary Worldbreaker facility while explosions lit up the space around Council strongholds across dozens of star systems. Terry's ship, the UES Defiant, raced through heavy enemy fire as Korath battlecruisers tried to stop him from reaching the ancient installation. His small fleet of human and alien ships fought desperately against overwhelming odds, knowing that everything depended on reaching the control center before Council forces could organize a proper defense. On the surface of Korath Prime, Colonel Nancy Davis led Therian rebels in a coordinated uprising that caught their former masters completely by surprise. The crystal miners had spent centuries learning every detail of Korath's cities and defenses. Now they used that knowledge to strike at power plants and communication centers while their oppressors scrambled to understand what was happening. Admiral Carter commanded the main Resistance fleet as it engaged Council forces directly for the first time. Her ships were outnumbered 3-1, but they had the advantage of surprise and desperation. Human tactics that emphasized speed and flexibility proved effective against alien forces that had grown comfortable with their technological superiority. The Wanderer fleets struck at Council supply lines throughout the outer sectors, using their superior speed and knowledge of secret routes to hit targets and disappear before defenders could respond. Captain Zek Nor coordinated these attacks from his flagship, watching with satisfaction as years of careful planning finally paid off. The moment of truth came when Terry Thompson fought his way into the primary Worldbreaker control center. The facility was enormous, built into an asteroid that had been hollowed out by the Forerunners millions of years ago. Ancient corridors led to a central chamber where the network controls waited for someone brave enough to use them. Dr. Patricia Green had given Terry detailed instructions on how to activate the system, but she warned him that the process would take several minutes to complete. During that time, he would be vulnerable to attack from Council forces that were already moving toward the facility. Terry's small team would have to hold them off long enough for the network to come online. The control room was exactly as Patricia had described it. A vast chamber filled with glowing symbols and energy conduits that pulsed with power. Terry placed his hands on the activation controls and began the sequence that would either free the galaxy or doom the Resistance to failure. Behind him, his team set up defensive positions and prepared for the final battle. Council ships arrived just as the Worldbreaker network began to activate. Terry's defenders fought desperately in the corridors outside the control room, while ancient Forerunner devices throughout the galaxy started to power up. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the asteroid as both sides fought for the future of civilization. The first signs of success came when Council ships throughout the galaxy began to lose power. Their shields flickered and failed. Their weapons shut down. Their communication systems went silent. The technological advantage that had kept them in power for millennia disappeared in a matter of minutes. On Zalani Prime, enslaved workers looked up in amazement as their masters' flying vehicles fell from the sky. The elegant energy weapons that Zalani guards carried became useless pieces of metal. For the first time in their lives, the oppressed had a fighting chance against their oppressors. Vorthak warrior ships found themselves dead in space as their engines failed and their life support systems struggled to function. The proud warrior, race that had conquered dozens of worlds, suddenly faced the possibility of defeat at the hands of the species they had enslaved. But the true victory was not just technological. As news of the successful activation spread through resistance communication, networks, oppressed peoples across the galaxy rose up against their masters. Slaves broke their chains. Rebels emerged from hiding. Neutral races that had stayed silent for centuries suddenly found the courage to choose sides. The psychological impact was devastating for the Council. Their authority had been built on fear and superior technology, and both were gone. Local governors who had ruled through intimidation found themselves facing angry mobs. Military commanders discovered that their troops were more interested in saving themselves than fighting a losing battle. Admiral Carter's final broadcast to the galaxy was heard on every world where intelligent life existed. Her voice carried the promise of freedom to billions of beings who had never known anything but oppression. She spoke of a new age where all races could work together as equals, where young civilizations would not be destroyed by their elders. Terry Thompson survived the final assault on the control center, though barely. When Council forces broke through his defenses, they found him standing over controls that had already completed their work. The Worldbreaker network was active, and nothing could shut it down without the Forerunner codes that only the Resistance possessed. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Without their technological advantages, Council forces found themselves fighting on equal terms for the first time in millions of years. Most chose surrender over destruction, though some die-hard groups continued to resist until they were completely defeated. The Resistance became the foundation for a new galactic confederation based on cooperation rather than domination. Representatives from hundreds of species met to write laws that would prevent any group from gaining too much power over others. The mistakes that had led to the rise of the Galaxy Council would not be repeated. Captain Jake Morrison, who had witnessed the original betrayal on New Geneva Station, lived to see humanity take its place among the stars as liberators rather than victims. The young race that had been marked for extinction became the catalyst that freed the entire galaxy from an ancient cycle of oppression. The Galaxy Council's betrayal had been complete, but it had also been their undoing. In forcing humanity to run, they had created the circumstances that led to their own destruction. The command that was meant to ensure human extinction had instead become the first step toward galactic freedom. The age of the Council was over, and the age of equality had begun.